Thanks for joining us for this afternoon's session. Shooting and deaths in custody when police shoot to kill. We're really privileged and a great day to be joined by our guests today. We've got Paul Silva, whose uncle David was murdered by prison guards in New South Wales prison. We've got Ron and Leesa, whose daughter Courtney was shot dead murdered, I should say, tragically by New South Wales police. We've got David Shoebridge, who's a Greens member of the Legislative Assembly for New South Wales, and Miro, Sandev, who's a Solidarity member. Would you please all join me in thanking them so much for coming. We're a great team. We'll hear from all of them, and then we'll have time for plenty of time for discussion. Paul, if you wanted to speak first, come up here, or you want to?
No, everybody.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Good day, everyone. My name's Paul Silva. I'm the nephew of David Dungay Jr. On the 29th of December 2015, me and my family members located in Kempsey, New South Wales, was notified by police. Got a knock on the door, 3 police officers, 2 constables, and the one with the stars, the sergeant or whatever he is, knocked on the door and asked was my mum home, which is my uncle's older sister, sorry. And I said, could I take a message? They said, no, we're not going to leave a message with a kid. Can you get your mother to give us a call back when she returns home? Mum returned home. I got mum to call the local police station. Police officers turned up at our door and told us that my uncle, David Dungay Jr., passed away in Long Bay Jail. They didn't know the circumstances at the time, but straight away, me and my family knew that it was suspicious and there was something wrong with it, knowing that he only had 3 weeks to be released. So after that, we was contacted by the investigating officers into the death of my uncle. They confirmed who he was because we didn't believe that it was our uncle. We were just in so much disbelief at the time. So then we had a meeting in the Kempsey police station with the guys investigating the murder of my uncle, and they really didn't have a straight answer for anything. I asked them, was there inmates around at the time of the death, and they said, we're not quite sure. The inquest started on the 16th of July. Yep, 16th of July. The hardest 2 weeks of our family's life, to sit there and continuously watch a video of a family member being murdered almost at least 3 times a day. It's a big struggle for our family to sit there and just, to watch a family member be killed. And on day 1 of the inquest, a lawyer for corrective officers jumped up and said that my uncle did not die at the hand of corrective officers, when it's now released to the media, the footage, that he was held down and he died at the hands of those officers. The officers was working probably the next day after the death. They should have been stood down until the inquest is over. Like, if a police officer kills someone, they get put on desk duties until the investigation is over. They should have been stood down, but they're still not. They're still working today. We also heard in the inquest that, from one of the experts that was up on there, basically said that the guards killed him, the nurses did nothing to revive him. They didn't do CPR properly at the time. Yeah, it's just appalling. The government needs to hold these people accountable for their actions and use them as an example, so it stops happening behind the bars, whether it's with police or with corrective officers. They really need to hold these people accountable and use them as an example to stop their colleagues from following their foot tracks. You know what I mean? But the government's letting them get away with this, and it's sad to say, but this could still happen. So we've got adjourned due to lack of lack of time for witnesses in the inquest. So it's adjourned till the 4th of March next year. We've already waited 3 years, 2.5 years for the first date of the inquest, and now we've got to wait another 10 months, 11 months just to find the findings of what happened to my uncle. I am expecting nothing to happen out of it, because when it does come to whether it's death in custody or by police, nothing's ever done about it. They've just sweep it under the carpet and just provide the police or correctors with more training where they could train them as much as they want, but letting them get away with murdering a human being is just not on. They need to basically, hold these people accountable, stand them down until the inquest's over, and just going back, just with my past history, just with police and all of that stuff. I'm from a small town in Kempsey, as I just said. Grew up being harassed by police mostly all my life. I'll share a story. One time I was walking down the street, and I was underage at the time, 15. A police officer pulled up beside me and goes, "Mr. Silva, I want to search you." I said, "No, I'm under the age of 18. You cannot search me unless there is adult present." I had my hands in my pocket. He tried to grab onto my arm. I pulled away and said, "You're not searching me." He's then thrown me to the ground and bashed me around the leg with his baton, telling me to stop resisting. I wasn't resisting, I was on the ground, basically couldn't move because my legs was being bashed. And it just goes to show that these guys that stand behind badges and stand behind a government, knowing that they're going to get away with so much brutality and excessive force, is just appalling. It needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. Like our family, we've had a rough travel, and it's never ever going to get easy again for us. We're traumatised. Like, I go to sleep at night, I can't even sleep. I sit there and the video of my uncle plays through my head over and over and over again. He called out, 25 plus times. He couldn't breathe. They continue to not listen. This was all over a packet of biscuits. So what happened was, he was in his cell. The nurse ordered the guards to remove the biscuits and remove the biscuits only. They've called in a riot squad, armed with shields, batons, tasers, pepper spray. They've gone to his room. They say they give him 1 minute to comply with directions. He doesn't comply. At this time he had a low sugar reading. He was a diabetic, so he was eating biscuits to sort of even it out. Then they've stormed his cell, smashed him on the face with the shield, busting his nose and his mouth, held him on the ground, face down on the ground, and cuffed him. At this stage my uncle's yelling, "I can't breathe, please, I'm trying to help, I'm begging you, I can't breathe." They say, "Stop resisting, Dungay, you can breathe, you're talking." So they're moving from one cell to a camera cell. As they're moving him, my uncle's saying, "I can't breathe, I beg you, I can't breathe." One of the guards' response is, "You brought this upon yourself, Dungay. Comply with our directions." They walk him to a camera cell, again place him face down on the bed, him continuously yelling he cannot breathe. They've placed a knee on his lower back, they've did a leg lock, and they've had a knee on the top of his neck area. They gave him an injection of 10 milligrams of midazolam. Less than minutes later, he takes his last breath, and one of the guards says, "Oh, he's gone, he stopped breathing." There was really no duty of care taken. My uncle screamed 25 plus times that he couldn't breathe, and all they sat there and all they said was, "Stop resisting, comply with our directions." They did not listen one bit to my uncle screaming for his life and begging for his life. The footage, if you wish to watch it, it has been released to the media. I believe it's on The Guardian. If you just type in David Dungay, the footages will come up. There's going to be rallies before the 4th of March to raise awareness for deaths in custody, whether it's by police or by correctives, just to get this out there and say enough is enough, stop killing human beings, and just stand the people down that are doing this. Use them basically, and I keep coming back and saying this because it needs to happen. The government really needs to pull their finger out and start using these people as an example so their colleagues don't follow their tracks and do what their colleagues are doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for speaking to us, Paul. It's obviously such a difficult tragedy and a time of injustice for Paul's family. Can we please thank Paul again for next we're going to hear from David Shoebridge.
Well, thanks everybody for coming to what is a pretty tough session this afternoon. As one of the Greens MPs in the State Parliament, I acknowledge the institution of Parliament is on Gadigal land, that we're gathered today on Gadigal land. And I pay my respects to those elders past, present and emerging, Paul, and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. You've heard some of Paul's and Latona's and the Dungay story from Paul. And obviously Paul and his family have had a significant history with police before. I mean, they're aware of the arbitrary nature of police power, as so many First Nations peoples around this country are aware of the arbitrary nature of police power. But I won't tell Leesa and Ron's story, but you'll hear another story of a family who wasn't aware of the arbitrary nature of police power and dealing with the consequences of the arbitrary exercise of police power. Because the structures that we put in place to hold police accountable are essential for dealing with those people on the margins of our society who are so often the subject of the use of police discretions and the use of police power. But as we've seen our police force become more and more militarised over the last 20 years in particular, their uniforms become paramilitary, their training becomes more paramilitary, their variety of options for force that they have to exercise in a situation become greater. And the mentality of the police being their job is to seize and control of a situation with whatever force is required to seize control of a situation as though they were separate to society and not a part of society. That's a very real change that I've been witnessing in the dynamic, particularly of the New South Wales Police, but I'd say police across the country. They're more aggressive, they're more paramilitary, they've got a variety of options of exerting force, and the idea of policing by consent, where the police force is part of society and they work best and most effectively where they're operating in concert with society rather than imposing force upon its society, that's something we need to remember, we need to reclaim, and we need to demand. Policing by consent. It's the bedrock of Western policing. When the UK first came up with the concept of a police force, and a bloke called Peel came up with the concept of a police force, the first and most important principle that he established for the police force in the UK was, in a free and liberal society, you can't have a paramilitary force imposing its will upon its citizens. In a free and a liberal society, it starts by policing by consent. The community need to want the police to exercise their power and act in partnership with the police, and we are forgetting that in New South Wales. How much are we forgetting it? Well, in July of last year, towards the end of July of last year, Danakul Mukmul, a man with quite a significant mental history, found himself at Central Station and he was having an episode. And he ran into a florist and he physically and seriously threatened a florist with a knife, a pair of scissors. Quite a frightening episode for the florist, moment of real fear and panic for the florist. He then ran out into the sort of concourse area towards Eddy Avenue out the front of Central Station, And within minutes, he was surrounded by police who all brought out their guns and started yelling at him. He had a mental illness, didn't comply with their directions, and within minutes they shot him dead. And when I saw and heard of what happened, my mind was immediately taken back 20 years earlier to a young man called Ron Levy, who was having another episode, this time on Bondi Beach. And mentally ill young man who had a knife on the beach in the dawn, nobody around, until a whole series of police surrounded Ron. Surrounded him, yelled at him, screamed at him. He had his knife, he didn't put his knife down, they shot him dead. Shot him dead. Following Ron Levy, there was an outcry. And there was the community couldn't believe that when you have the better part of a dozen police around one man with a knife who was clearly mentally ill, why did they leap to lethal force, was the questions that were being asked. Why did you leap to lethal force? How is it that it ended up with Ron being killed? And I think many of us had the same questions about the killings that have followed since. The response the police had in 1997 was somewhat defensive. But then they said, okay, well, let's have a new tool of applying force in response to the outrage about the killing of Ron Levy. And they said, let's have tasers. And if you give us tasers, we'll be able to taser people in these situations and we won't have the same killings. And they said, and also give us capsicum spray as well. And we'll keep the baton and we'll keep the gun. But let's have all these other options of applying force. And since then, we've seen tasers rolled out across New South Wales. And have the killings stopped? No, they haven't. For a short period after 1997, there was a trend line down in the number of police killings. But then at about the time that Andrew Scipione became the police commissioner and we saw a real push of militarisation, we saw the killings start to rise again. And how do we know that? Well, in budget estimates last year, so in September of last year, coming up to that, after Dunkel's death, I put in a Freedom of Information request, a GIPA request, to the New South Wales Police. I said, I was distressed by the fact of the killing. And I asked for how many people had been shot dead by police, what were their names, and how many of them had identified history of mental illness. And the response that came back to me, actually, I don't get shocked by much of the way the police respond to these kinds of things. I don't get shocked by the indifference of our state government very much. I kind of have a low level of expectation. But the response shocked me. The response that came back from the New South Wales Police is, we don't keep the data, we don't know who was shot dead, we don't have a database, I'm sorry, we can't tell you. I got on the phone and sent a fairly curt response, and I said, if that is your answer, that's shameful. And we will expose you for this. Go and find out who you shot dead. I'm not asking you the people you've killed, that have been killed in other aspects of police operations. I'm only asking for the ones you've actually shot dead. They were then somewhat shamed into the response, and we ended up coming up eventually with a list of names. They had to Google it in part. They don't have a database. They don't have a record. They don't have a structured database that follows the people they've killed. They had to Google it. I had the police commissioner, in the course of this fight, I had the police commissioner in front of me in budget estimates, and I said to him, how can you have a force that doesn't actually even keep a record of who you killed? How will you be able to learn the lessons of the past? How will you be able to understand what went wrong and have a systematic approach to fixing the use of police force if you don't even know who you've killed, let alone track whether or not they have a mental illness and how you interacted with people with mental illness? He did concede that. The police's response has been, in part, well, everyone now gets 1 day of mental health training. Every police officer gets 1 day of mental health training. When you look at that training, it's actually not about dealing with people with mental illness. It's actually about the legal processes and the structures for actually putting them away once you arrest them. There's about less than 10% of police get a 5-day training course in dealing with people with mental illness, and that's meant to be reasonably effective. But with those kinds of figures, almost inevitably, the police that come to respond to those critical incidents where you've got somebody, particularly with mental illness, they don't have the training to de-escalate. They don't have an understanding about how to actually respond to people with mental illness, and time after time after time, we see an escalation. The mere arrival of the police sees an incident escalate, and within a matter of seconds or minutes, we can have a death and a killing and a tragedy. And it's an instant, but then families live with it forever. You know, one instant and the family lives with it forever. I firmly believe that the police's whole concept of use of force needs to be turned on its head. And the directive that's given to New South Wales Police that when they come in they must physically control the situation in as short a time as possible, needs to be fundamentally revisited, particularly when you're dealing with citizens and residents who have mental illness. Because the police in those situations turning up and exerting their authority and trying to impose control against somebody who's suffering a mental illness is quite often 180 degrees the wrong thing to do. It escalates issues. There's fear and there's anxiety, and the anxiety response feeds into the police, and it ratchets up in a very short period of time, and we have these lethal results. The whole concept of use of force, I think, needs to fundamentally change. Just quickly on deaths in custody. David Dungay should not have died. And we know he shouldn't have died, because if David had been in a prison system anywhere other than New South Wales in this country, David, who had a quite significant mental illness, would not have been in jail. He would have been transferred to a secure forensic mental health facility where they have training and skills and understanding of people with mental illness. Because David had quite a significant mental illness. That's why he was being held in Long Bay Hospital. He had the additional complication of his diabetes, with his low blood sugars, inflamed the situation. But if David had been in any other jail system other than New South Wales, Paul wouldn't be sitting there. And we would not be talking about David in the past tense, because he wouldn't have been in Long Bay Hospital jail. He would have been in a secure forensic mental health facility. And I think that has been lost in part in the discussion that we've been having about David's death and deaths in custody. It's really been lost in some of the discussion. There's one obvious immediate reform we should do. And in fact, the Australian Royal College of Psychiatrists made a statement in December of last year, I think partly in response to David's death. And they called for all jurisdictions in the country to change their models, so that if somebody is identified with having a serious mental illness within the prison system, that they're taken out of the prison system and they're put in a secure forensic mental health facility and they're dealt with as a patient, not as a prisoner. We should be demanding that reform now. We don't have to wait 2.5 years for the coronial findings and the government response. Every other state has done this. We should do it. If we'd done it before, David would still be alive. Happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. We're going to hear from Leesa Topic now. Would you please make her welcome? Thank her so much.
Cause of death, to quote. Courtney Topic died from a gunshot wound to the chest. Manner of death, to quote again. Courtney Topic died in the course of a police operation. Her death was by gunshot in circumstances in which she was very likely suffering a mental health crisis. It was in a public place holding a knife. These statements form part of the coronial inquest findings into our beautiful daughter's death. These words are still so foreign to us. A living nightmare that we will endure forevermore. Courtney's tragic death continues to impact us to the core. Our family, our friends, our community. They all bear witness to our endless pain and suffering. We are grateful to the many, many special people that love and surround us, who continue to do so to this day. It is with them and for our beautiful Courtney that we are here today. We are anyone. We are Rod and Leesa Topic from Western Sydney. We work hard. We've raised our awesome foursome, our 4 amazing children here. They've all attended the local Catholic primary school and high school. We are part of and contribute to our local community. That fateful day, February 10th, 2015, by the side of a major intersection at Hoxton Park at 11:47 a.m, a bullet pierced our Courtney's beating heart. She slumped to the ground, choking on her own blood, gasping for her final breath. 41 seconds after the New South Wales police arrived on scene. In our opinion, there was no incident until the police arrived. But within 41 seconds, Courtney was dead. This tragedy could not have been foreseen by us or anyone that knew Courtney or knows us. And yet it did. To quote point 6 of the coronial inquest findings, Courtney's death is emphatically not one where it can be said this couldn't have been prevented. Her death raises broad issues about how police officers are trained to deal with people suffering a mental health crisis. We have stated previously that the involved officers did not go out that day to take a young woman's life, our Courtney. We reiterate this. Nonetheless, the organisation that placed them there must be accountable and transparent. The New South Wales Police Commissioner previously stated this in an interview on the 7:30 report. Deputy State Coroner Elizabeth Ryan has delivered 10 recommendations in her findings to the Police Commissioner. As stated previously, we are happy with the findings. Courtney is never coming home. We, her broken family, must live with that for every second of every day. The only woman in recent history to be shot dead by police in the midst of a police operation. A young woman that was obviously in the grips of a mental health crisis. A woman who hadn't committed a crime, hadn't hurt anyone, approached anyone, talked to anyone, or threatened anyone. Yet within 41 seconds, she was shot dead. Why Courtney? Why us? Courtney's death must not be in vain. Mental health is growing exponentially currently in our society. If the recommendations put forward by the coroner are not addressed and in a timely manner, then it is only a matter of time till another family loses a precious loved one in circumstances that could have and should have been prevented. We wish to meet with the Police Commissioner, Commissioner Fuller, to discuss the findings of the inquest and a way forward to ensure the safety and well-being of those suffering mental illness and their interactions with the New South Wales Police Force. We have not heard from anyone within New South Wales Police in regards to the senseless loss of our gorgeous girl. The lack of communication with us and our family, we find abhorrent and arrogant. A formal apology does not bring Courtney home, but at the very least, it acknowledges Courtney and the failings of that day that led to her tragic death. Our child is dead at the hands of the New South Wales Police. We held her hand, we stroked her hair, we screamed at her to come back to us. All the while she lay in her coffin, ready to be laid to eternal rest. Her death that could have been prevented. Yes, she had a mental illness, but no, she didn't deserve to die for that. 41 seconds she was given, and no interaction from her with the police, and yet still she was shot. Addressing the recommendations will not benefit Courtney. They may prevent another family from this horrendous trauma. Who knows? May even be a police officer's loved one suffering a mental health crisis that is spared. recommendations are there for the betterment of all concerned. A systematic review into all deaths at the hands of the New South Wales Police. Currently, as David has said, our understanding is that this is not formally happening. I go back to the words accountability and transparency. Waiting 3.5 years to get to inquest, and each day living this nightmare is beyond cruel. The ongoing physical, emotional and psychological toll that we suffer as we repeatedly go through the horrific events of that day needs to be addressed also. The coronial inquest investigation process was extremely thorough and exhaustive, but the time it took to reach fruition is deplorable. In our opinion also, the police's attitude at the coronial inquest requires addressing. Their apparent lack of comprehension of us, our pain, our suffering, at their hands as they sat seats away from us was staggering at the least, disrespectful even. We must strive together to ensure that Courtney's senseless death is not in vain, and the lessons learned from the failings will be addressed in a timely manner so as to prevent this tragedy occurring again. Thank you.
Would everyone please just join me once again in thanking Leesa and Wrong Topic. We're going to hear from Miro, Sandev last. Is there someone out you remember?
Thank you again to Paul and Leesa and Ron in particular for sharing your stories today. It's obviously very difficult, and I think it's very powerful for everyone to hear what you've said. And I think the injustices that we've heard about today, what I want to talk about is how they are a result of the function that police serve in our society, which is ultimately to protect the interests of the rich and the powerful. Because I think, we are sold the idea that the police are there to serve and protect, to fight crime, to promote justice, to keep us safe. But what I want to say today is that the only thing that they really keep safe is the status quo of an unequal society, and one that's increasingly getting more unequal. One of the things that researchers have shown is that the police spend a minority of their time actually investigating crimes, and they spend most of their time hassling people that haven't done anything wrong. I think the police does, protect the interests of the 1%. They need them because they are a minority, in our society. They need a force like the police to keep the majority down. That includes working class people of all marginalised groups, whether it's people of colour, as we've heard, people suffering from mental illness, and many others. And just to reflect, I think the modern police force emerged around 200 years ago as part of the Industrial Revolution, not in response to any growth in individual crime, but in the growth of the organisation, actually, of the working class through mobilisations that were happening. So they were introduced initially to deal with things like strikes and demonstrations and riots. To do that, they were given the power to use deadly force, and they have huge discretion now in how they can use those powers. Besides the violence that we've heard about today, other things that police are involved in is, for example, disrupting strikes and breaking up protests. So when the people that are actually killed or violently attacked by police, when they go out and protest, they're attacked again. Police discretion, I think, in making arrests, which is a huge problem, goes to another key point. Because I think the modern form of policing is about patrols that are actually involved in preventive policing. Before there were the modern police, the constables didn't go out patrolling like they do now. But modern cops are wandering around, driving around, looking for trouble. And they're mostly not chasing bad guys, as we're told, but they're on the lookout for people who might do something wrong. And the idea that is that visible patrols discourage people from committing crimes and reassure ordinary citizens about their safety. But again, people who study these things have shown that police patrols have no impact on crime in that sense, and they don't make most people feel safe. They generally are connected to crimes not through their patrolling but through calls to 000, which actually bring them off their patrols. But because they do the patrolling, they're constantly looking for potential criminals, and they can't know in advance who this is going to be. So they're looking for criminal types, and I think that's the modern policing is actually not about crime so much, but about criminality. From the very beginning, police are taught to look for people who simply look suspicious, and I think that's the inculcation that new police recruits get. It's not an accidental thing, I think, because actually the types of laws that they uphold are deeply racist, sexist, bigoted and full of class hatred. And I think because they are tasked with defending ultimately private property, it does teach them to be suspicious of people, working class communities, unemployed people, young people, people of colour or ethnic minorities, everyone that the police might assume ought to have little in life. These groups are treated with suspicion. And just to talk a little bit about racial profiling, which has been in the nature of the work, I think from the very beginning, in particular in Australia, which was built directly into the system of dispossession and attempted genocide of First Nations people. New South Wales actually has the oldest, mounted police unit in the world, formed in 1825, actually to help the army, fight to steal Wiradjuri country. And I think, it's not something that comes from ordinary people who go into the police force. It actually comes from the top of the police. Earlier this year, Victoria's Assistant Police Commissioner, Brett Guerin, who's also head of the Professional Standards Command, resigned after being exposed for making explicitly racist and sexist posts on social media. I apologise in advance for reading this out. This is what he said on social media. This is what happens when the lash is abolished, when the jigaboo runs riot and out of control. The jigaboo needs the lash, which is a racist slur for a black person. This was a man who was in charge of the Professional Standards Command of Victoria Police. This sort of racism, driven from the top politicians and from the top police commissioners, leads to the over-policing of people of colour. Aboriginal people are stopped and searched at much higher rates than anyone else. When charged with offences, they're more likely to be found guilty, and when found guilty, they're more likely to be jailed. The results are staggering in terms of incarceration. Aboriginal people are incarcerated at rates amongst the highest of any persecuted group in the world, and almost a third of the people in prison nationwide are Indigenous, despite only making up 2.5% of the population or slightly more. Again, Indigenous children are the majority in detention centres, and once in jail they're subject to the brutal attacks from prison guards, as we've heard. I think the point I want to make is that cops and prison guards are specialists in violence, using force routinely. And in every situation, I think as David mentioned, they are asked to take control. And in every situation they are asked to show the authority of the law and the state. That's the ultimate overriding goal in every sort of interaction they have with people. So I think sometimes the whole point is the violence, because it sends a message about who's in control. And as people have mentioned, they're becoming more and more militarised. And just like Indigenous people are overrepresented in the prison system, so are people suffering from mental illness. Again, people with mental health disorders or cognitive impairment are between 6 and 9 times more likely to be imprisoned. And between 1989 and 2011, 42% of people shot by police were suffering from mental illness of some kind. So I think not only are they not properly trained in actually dealing with these situations, but their very role predisposes them to the opposite. You know, as the repressive arm of the state, I think they are actually, you know, engaging in kind of aggressive behaviour which can escalate the situations people have mentioned. They're actually exactly what's not needed in those situations to calm people when they may be having an episode of being unwell. Part of the reason why I think more and more people with mental illness are having interactions with the police is the chronic defunding of mental health care services. The former system of institutions which had their own shocking problems was actually shut down, you know, progressively up until the 1990s, and nothing was really put in place as an alternative. You know, there are government-funded appointments with psychologists, but these are limited to only 10 visits per year, which is totally inadequate. And besides that, the only option for most people is their GP or the hospital emergency department. And because of the closures of the institutions over the last 15 years, alongside that, there's also been a dismantling, I think, of the system of community mental health, including teams of support people. These were teams of people with social workers, psychologists, peer workers, nurses and other professionals that provided assessment, case management and support services for people with mental illness. They also had the capacity to assist in responding to crises when someone was unwell. These are systems that used to exist, and you know, they're not that radical. They've previously existed, we can have them back, but they've been dismantled through privatisation. Okay, I'll just wrap up. So I think many of the people that were previously housed in those institutions basically ended up on the street or in jail, and prisons have functioned as warehouses for marginalised people. I think in terms of what we do, more mental health training for police might reduce the number of killings, but if we actually want to stop the shootings for good, we need to take the guns off the police. There's no reason why the police should be armed. The police in the UK don't normally carry guns, and I think there's no reason why we can't have that situation here. Other than that, I'd say we also need to actually properly fund community mental health. We need to say that we need to take the children out of detention and shut the detention centres down. And I think we need to start seriously talking about abolition of the prison system. Because ultimately, if we want to get rid of the racism and the class hatred that produces these situations, I think we do need to tackle the system that maintains them. Thanks.